Good morning, everybody. This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, and today I'm going to be talking about my 10 favorite George Pérez comics found in graphic novel format. So, let's get started.
Hello, this is George Pérez, and you're watching Near Mint Condition, and I'm assuming you already know that.
A clip was from a few years ago when I was supposed to interview George Pérez at a convention, but if you know about conventions and the lines for George Pérez, you know how little time he has, but he was kind enough to do that. That was probably from about 4 or 5 years ago, and I met him a handful of times throughout my life when I was 11, in my 20s, in my 30s, and then the last time was in Chicago. And I think anybody that has ever met him can probably agree that he is the nicest creator that you'll ever meet. He takes his time with everybody, whether you're a 11-year-old boy that looked up to him, and you were an aspiring comic book artist. He took his time, and that's my story when I first met him. So it's I'm doing this video because this was supposed to be a video about where to start reading Superman, but I kind of pushed that back because of the news yesterday from George Pérez himself, talking about the unfortunate terminal cancer, the pancreatic cancer that he was diagnosed with, and he was given 6 months to a year to live, and he doesn't want to seek treatment because he doesn't want to. And it was a beautiful, well-written. It was a beautiful letter that went out to his fans. It shows you how much the man cares. But the reason he doesn't want to do treatment is because he doesn't want to spend times in at the hospital or with doctors. He wants to spend that time with his wife and his family. And I thought that was such a beautiful message. I'm sure most of y'all probably heard about it. I'm sure there's videos about it. But this is focusing on his art. So this is my thank you to George Pérez, one of the greatest artists. I'm going to be looking at my 10 favorite comics that he drew or co-wrote or wrote and found in collected edition. And I didn't know when to make this video, and I have no idea how long it's going to go because I know how much he means to me. And I'll explain why. When I was a kid growing up in the world of comics, we didn't have that many Latin American superheroes, Hispanic superheroes, and I didn't need that. I've never needed a superhero to look like me. My favorite characters are Wolverine, Storm, Scrooge McDuck. They don't need to look anything like me. I always think it's what's on the inside that counts. But I always, since I was a child, since I first opened that first comic, I always wanted to work in the world of comics. And Perez was the very first last name I saw that I remember as a kid. I thought, that sounds Latino. Posiblemente habla español. So back then, there was also no internet. There was no Wizard magazine that would show you the pictures of your favorite artists. I had no idea. To me, all these people were like gods. Chris Claremont, Mark Silvestri, John Byrne, all these people. I had no idea what they looked like. I didn't really care. They were gods sitting upon thrones and writing and drawing these comics that I loved so much. But I remember the name George Pérez, and I remember just focusing on that so hard, and I would thought, maybe one day I could work in comics. That would be so cool, because this Perez guy did it, and he's Latino, I think. And then, of course, a few years later, I got to meet him at, it wasn't even a convention. They used to do these mall signings. I don't know if y'all remember. I'm sure most of you know malls, but malls were huge in the 80s. And even a comic book store would love to find a place in a mall. Like, there would be a waiting list for comic book stores to go and be set up at a mall. So a comic book store about an hour from my hometown where I grew up had a signing with George Pérez. And they put just flyers out everywhere at local comic book shops where I shopped. And I told my mom and dad, please, let's go. I didn't tell them why, because I thought it was, they might think it was weird meeting somebody, because this was like one of my first times I ever met a comic book creator. So we went, And I remember, waiting in a long line, but completely worth it. This guy was. He drew a lot of my favorite stories that I found really cheap because I didn't have much money and had to mow lawns and cut tobacco. It's back then. I don't know if they've enforced that, the child labor laws. But anyway, whatever it took me to make money, I would buy comics, and I would find beat up comics, and some of the comics were done by George Pérez, and I took my stack of just ripped comics. Some of them didn't, like my Uncanny X-Men annual volume 3 didn't even have a cover, and he still signed it. And I talked to him, and I remember telling him, do you know how much I love your artwork, and one day I want to work in comics, and he was so supportive. Just took his time with this little 11-year-old kid that when he didn't have to. When you sometimes in this hobby or whatever you're into, the saying is true: never meet your heroes, because some of them will let you down. Some of them won't take their time with you, and it really depends because everybody's different, right? Some people, it depends on your personality. But he was a character. No matter what age I met him in, he was a character. He was a joy to be around. He's such a happy guy, and always took his time, took extra time with the ladies that dressed up like some of the characters that he helped create. And if you know anything about George Pérez, then that's that's fact. So I'm gonna go ahead and start talking about it. I'm sorry if I'm just rambling. I did not come prepared for this. About these stories and where to find them. The very first story I'm going to be talking about is, of course, the first comic that I found Perez's artwork, and that is found in this omnibus right here. It's also available in Epic Collections, and that is annual number 3 of X-Men. Now, my copy, because it was beat up and I found it used, did not even have a cover. I had no idea what this cover looked like until years later, until I was able to make more money and was able to buy it. But this was my first taste at this era of art, because I had come in through the Paul Smith, John Romita Jr. era, and then of course Mark Silvestri was drawing comics at the time when I ended up getting this, where he was drawing Uncanny X-Men along with Rick Leonardi. But this was the type of artwork that I remember thinking, oh, this is what old art looks like. That's cool. And I remember looking at the way that he drew, particularly Storm, with how do I put it? Some extra curvage, not as bulky as Wolverine or as toned as Colossus, but she had these nice curves. And I was a kid, right? I was a little kid. So this is the book that I took to get signed by him. And this is the story I shared, this one. And I took a couple of other books, mainly, one was Crisis on Infinite Earths. But this is definitely the one that I got signed by him. This was my introduction to George Pérez. And I remember not knowing for the longest time that this is where the credits were, because I thought this was all part of the newspaper stand. But I remember when finding his name, I'm like, oh, this is the guy that drew the Avengers. This is the Korvac Saga guy. It's the same artist. So that's when the name kind of stuck and got embedded into my head. Next up, of course, I'm going to be talking about New Teen Titans. This is the book with Marv Wolfman, and this is the latest printing. I believe this one is out of print right now, but it is available in trade paperback format. This is when he came over to DC. Both him and Marv Wolfman, as the story goes, were just kind of not really welcomed by Jim Shooter whenever Jim Shooter started rising up in the ranks at Marvel Comics, and that's the story I've always heard. So they took off and went over to DC and made this title. They relaunched Teen Titans, and they had tried before a couple of years before Perez and Wolfman, and it was a failed attempt. And then when both of them came in on the book, it just sold. And I mean, this sold well. This was their flagship title for a long time, and matched the numbers. It was ranked up there with the numbers of Uncanny X-Men. What Chris Claremont and John Byrne were doing in Uncanny X-Men, they were doing here in Teen Titans. And I think most people would probably agree that this book, and then several other books, like Firestorm later on, they had a Marvel feel to them. They didn't feel like a lot of the DC books that were being published at the time. And this is during the Bronze Age of comics, because this is before Crisis on Infinite Earths. And, you know, reading this stuff is just completely amazing. Like, going back and reading it, the stories still stand out. He co-created some of my favorite characters. You know, like, you have Deathstroke, you have Nightwing. Yeah, I know, it's just a change in costume. But hey, that disco costume was badass. I don't care. The design was awesome. But, you know, Cyborg, Beast Boy was around for a while. But Raven and Trigon and just Brother Blood, all these characters that you remember, all these villains, and then some of the characters from Teen Titans, brought in some characters from the past, from the Teen Titans past. If you've not read this stuff and you enjoy X-Men, this is awesome. This is just as good. And, man, one day I'd love for that X-Men New Teen Titans Dark Phoenix, Darkseid crossover to come out in some kind of collected format. I will take that as a huge, just platinum gallery edition, whatever format, because his art rightly deserves it. It's just beautiful. And then from there, Marv Wolfman and George Pérez took a break to do this big storyline that DC had been wanting to do for a while. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to be in chronological order. It's just the way that it's happening. And that's Crisis on Infinite Earths. As a matter of fact, my very first DC comic was Crisis on Infinite Earths. And talk about a kid being confused. But I just wanted to know what happened to Supergirl. Now, both of these are not my original copies. My original copies are long gone. But I did get to meet both Wolfman and Perez, and I had to get both of these signed. And I'm not much of a collector of single issues anymore because I have collected editions, but those hold a special place in my heart. So this is in trade paperback format. It's available in deluxe edition, and then this absolute edition, which is my favorite way to read this story, because if you know anything about Perez, you know he can pack in as much action into one single frame, and the details. And to me, the art deserves to be in this format, to notice all the little details that he draws in his backgrounds and his characters. I mean, he can put like 20 characters into one little frame, where most people probably would not even dare do that unless it's like a splash page. The man is just a machine. Look at that. What else can you say just looking at this artwork? So this is the story, of course, that, you know, reignited DC Universe, that retconned a lot of stories. You know, they started over with Superman, Batman, a little bit with Year One. I mean, he was still Batman, but the other big story that they decided to start over fresh is the next book I'm talking about, and that is Wonder Woman. This is the post Crisis on Infinite Earths reimagining of Wonder Woman by George Pérez. Now, Len Wein did step up and help him with the script, but the artwork, the plot, oh my gosh. This is George Pérez pretty much just going back to the mythological age of Diana. This is him just retelling everything involving all the gods and retelling her origin, where she came from. And of course, this drop dead gorgeous just art that he reintroduces her to the world of man. Oh my goodness. This is one of my favorite, how do I put it? One of my favorite pieces of work that he did as far as artwork. The plot is great. It is dialogue heavy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But, oh my gosh, I love it. I'm going to talk about my favorite piece of work that he did. As a matter of fact, Minerva here, Cheetah, this is the version that they used for the movie. I don't know why I just brought that up, because some of you probably did not even like that movie. But I always liked this version of Minerva. I thought that this was a good Cheetah. I like this updated Cheetah. And then he introduces new supporting cast members, not just Steve Trevor, and all of that, all the stories. Now, he only drew, like, I think the first 20 or so issues, but he still wrote them all the way up until issue 61, 62, and he ended it with the War of the Gods. But by then, you know, he wanted to have a big Wonder Woman celebration at DC. Sorry, this is turning into more of a little history lesson instead of just showcasing the artwork, but sorry, I was not prepared for this video. But by then, Perez was just tired of DC editorial, so he started looking elsewhere after or during War of the Gods. Actually, during War of the Gods, he was drawing another series that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, and that is Infinity Gauntlet. look at that cover. That to me is one of the most iconic covers in comic book history. That just speaks pure badassness. The Titan holding the Infinity Gauntlet. Like if you had been reading Silver Surfer and seen his return, and then you're like, oh my gosh, he's got all the Infinity Gems. I know they call them stones in the movie. It's gems in the comics. Although I think they're changing that. But with Jim Starlin, he brought a miniseries. Here we go, called The Infinity Gauntlet. And this is the Mad Titan, Thanos, just coming in and deciding, for the love of death, he's going to wipe out a fraction of humanity with the snap of his fingers. And it is one of the most awesomest beginning to a miniseries. Now, I know when I was a kid, I thought, oh man, George Pérez is amazing. He's drawing this now. This is going to be the greatest. And then, of course, by issue 4, we had Ron Lim helping out. And Ron Lim gets to finish out the series. Now, I thought as a kid, and I think like most of us, it was because George Pérez is such a good artist. This is Ron Lim. And Perez does finish out Ron Lim, though he has his finishes and inks. We all thought, well, he can't keep a monthly series. That sucks. But what I didn't know is at the time that he was doing War of the Gods at the same time that he was drawing this, and it just got to be too much. Not only drawing, but he was also writing those stories. So he was writing and then drawing 2 monthly books. That's a lot. So after this, he took a little bit of a break. He didn't do as many. He didn't do that again. He didn't write and draw again for a monthly series. Now, the next book I'm going to be talking about is a single issue, and it's back at DC. It's available in the old trade paperbacks of the Man of Steel. It's not available. The story's not been collected in hardcover format yet, but will be available in Man of Steel Volume 4. And that is this particular issue right here. Action Comics 600. And the reason that I love this... Yeah, sure, it's the kiss. It's a weird kiss, though. It's like he kisses her without permission. But, yeah, Kryptonian ways and whatever. But this right here. John Byrne and George Pérez. Both of these magnificent forces coming together and doing one story. The breakdowns by John Byrne and the finishes by George Pérez. And it's interesting because you've seen John Byrne ink stuff, you've seen him finish other people's work, and you've seen George Pérez ink and finish other people's work too by the time you read this. And you know that each one of them has such a strong art that no matter who they finish, it ends up looking like John Byrne's art or George Pérez's artwork. Like the case of Infinity Gauntlet, where Perez got to finish out some of Ron Lim's breakdowns, or pencils rather. And it was just crazy that both of these worked on this particular story. Now, this story has other aspects that I like, but for somebody that fell in love with art, and both of my favorite, two of my favorite artists, those are George Pérez details right there. Where I think Byrne probably wouldn't have done that much detail. He would have had a lot more swirls. But anyway, where the hell was I? Yeah, both of these wonderful creators that I grew up reading, XMen and New Teen Titans, coming together to work on this big anniversary issue. This is, I think, John Byrne's final issue of Superman. But, absolutely freaking love this. This speaks for itself. The artwork is awesome. I can't wait for you all to see it. If you haven't read it, it'll be in the Superman Man of Steel hardcover volume 4. Now, still back at Marvel, again, taking a break from monthly series, he worked on this amazing story found in this particular omnibus, and also found in, I believe it's out on Epic Collection already, but it's been out in trade paperback format. Hopefully one day it'll be a gallery edition. And that is, of course, Future Imperfect. Written by Peter David. And Peter David stated once that George Pérez was his favorite artist that he worked with. That he drew exactly what was in his head that he wanted to tell in a story. And I thought that this was magnificent. This is an alternate future. Of course, these are some of my favorite stories, where the Hulk is now being called Maestro. It's this old guy that is ruling over this particular Earth. We see characters, lineage characters that are related to some of the characters that we had been reading about in Peter David's Hulk. This is a magnificent story if you haven't read it, and the big selling point, let me just show you the trophy room. Come on, look at all these Easter eggs. I'm sure the script was, draw a couple of things like this. I know Peter David probably had a few ideas, but I can't imagine him filling up the room like this. Like, I'm sure this was more of Perez. Oh man, this piece of art right here, this double page spread, my goodness. I love that dead again. That might have been Peter David, honestly, with that kind of humor. But both of them did share that kind of humor. Perez did have that type of humor too. And if you don't know what Maestro looks like, I'm sure you've seen him around. That's this guy right here. Maybe if you've seen him, that's what I'm talking about. It's only 2 issues, but they were, supersized. And completely blew me away as a kid. And then for a while, I didn't really see Perez that much. He went to do some, sex and violence, that story arc. And he stayed between Marvel and DC. But one of my favorite things he did was relaunch the Avengers with Kurt Busiek. So this is after Heroes Reborn, when the heroes returned to the Marvel 616 universe. He relaunched this line. And I could not think of a better artist that has a classic style that could still deliver a punch to work with Kurt Busiek on the return of this wonderful series. This is my favorite Avengers series. And it's phenomenal because he's able to look at all those panels. Oh my god. Oh man, I really hope Marvel reprints this one day. I think it was voted in our top 20 most wanted reprints, but it's such an awesome story. It's the coming together of friends. You have all these Avengers throughout the years, and nobody can handle that better than somebody like Kurt Busiek, and drawing all these characters, of course, George Pérez. And they're deciding who the Avengers are going to be. Even Justice and Firestar. New Warriors for life, baby. But if you've not read it, this is classic Avengers. I mean, don't expect things like New Avengers, right? I always think New Avengers is an easy way to get into the Avengers. It's fun, but this relies more on the history of the Avengers, knowing a little bit of what's happened in the past, especially to enjoy some of the stories. The Ultron story here, Ultron Unlimited, is one of the most kick-ass stories you're ever going to read in an Avengers comic. And that's not Perez. Of course, there were some fill-in artists. Let's get back here. Now, like I was saying, he took a break from monthly comics, and from time to time he would draw things at DC and Marvel. And he did another series for DC that I really enjoyed, and that's found in this omnibus, but also in a trade paperback and standard size hardcover, Legion of 3 Worlds. Oh man, Jeff Johns getting to work with one of his favorite artists of all time. And he, like I said, he had been doing some things at Marvel and DC. He did Brave and the Bold with Mark Waid. Even during the New 52, he had a series about the Earth 2. I think it was World's Finest, that's what it was called. But if I had to pick over any of those, this would be it. Mainly because this is a Legion of Superheroes fanboy dream come true of all these different legions from across the different multiverse joining together to tell one kick-ass story featuring one of my favorite arch nemesis created by Jeff Johns during the Infinite Crisis event. I know he appeared before, but we don't want to spoil that. But anyway, this is such a kick-ass story featuring wonderful artwork by Perez. I absolutely love this stuff. Now, after this, he went on to do a few things. Like he did a series for Boom Studios called Sirens. He did a bunch of covers. He's still doing covers. But unfortunately, his eyesight started deteriorating, so he had to take a break from drawing. He had to take a break because of health issues from going to conventions. I think he limited himself to just 2 or 3 conventions a year. And, of course, because of the whole pandemic last year, I don't think he even did. Sorry, Uncanny Omar Talk Pretty one day. I don't think he did any of those. So the last book I'm going to be talking about is my favorite story that he worked on. And that is, of course, Avengers Justice League. I was lucky enough to meet Kurt Busiek and have George Pérez sign this. I love this cover. This cover just speaks so much. Oh, Captain America's shield, Mjolnir being held by Superman. What a kick-ass cover. But this is available in this beautiful hardcover deluxe edition. It's not called an absolute edition, but it is an absolute. It has a compendium and, of course, the main story. And I really hope that DC and Marvel come together to reprint this as soon as possible. I know it's a lot trickier than that. It's a lot difficult. It's a lot more difficult than that to say, let's reprint this, especially when you have two companies. But I really wish they would set things aside, and not necessarily the companies, but let's just say the owners and the lawyers, to reprint this, because the only way to do this story justice, much like the case of Crisis on Infinite Earths, is to own it in this absolute size format. With all these characters, it's insane how much he can draw in each panel. This, to me, is his magnum opus. It did not get better than this. The art is just phenomenal, detailed, dynamic, and again, able to draw all, sometimes 30 panels on a page, all written by Kurt Busiek. This is after their work in Avengers. Actually, George Pérez stayed on Avengers, but Perez had left the book. But this is after their work on Avengers. Here, let me keep going with some pages here. If you've not read it, it's available in trade paperback too. It's a little cheaper. The single issues are probably the cheapest route to get them in. But just the meeting of these titans, drawn by George Pérez. I hope one day this is reprinted. So this is my favorite thing that he did. I absolutely am speechless with some of this artwork found in here. And to be written by Kurt Busiek, a guy that can understand all these characters and knows how to write them, it was just both of them firing on all cylinders. And this is perfection. And that, as they say, is that. Now, these stories are not the only place you're going to find Perez's artwork. There are several art books, like Marvel just released the Marvel art of George Pérez. There's fantasy art books, covers that he's done. So if you are interested in any of these books, if they're still in stock, check out our sponsors. If you live in Europe and are interested in pre-ordering or purchasing Omnis, then you should definitely check out Walt's Comic Shop in Berlin, Germany. They have the cheapest pre-order prices for Marvel and DC big books within the EU. Flat shipping of €9.90 for EU countries. Extremely careful and sturdy packaging. Emails are answered within 24 hours. And they have a superb selection of new releases and out-of-print books on their website. Just head over to waltzcomicshop.com for more great deals and rare titles. And for a limited time, you can use the code nearmintcondition, all one word, at the checkout for free shipping to all EU countries with your first order. Walt's Comic Shop, your reliable source for Omnis and premium collected editions in Europe. CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online home for brand new graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They pride themselves on packaging your books so they arrive safely in an excellent condition, as well as prompt and helpful service. Check out the bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. CGN is excited to announce that they are now taking pre-orders. They're making it easier for you to ensure that you don't miss out on the hottest releases. CGN is currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, let them know that you were referred by Near Mint Condition at the checkout, and you'll receive a credit for free shipping on your next order. This promotion is valid for U.S. customers only. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount and quality shipping and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. And that was my list. That was my top 10 favorite George Pérez artwork found in collected editions. Please, by all means, share your list. Let me know in the comments down below what your first George Pérez comic was, what your favorite stories are, whether it's your top 10 list, top 20, top 50, I don't care. We're just here to share the positivity of his amazing artwork and talk about it. So, yeah. It sucks, you know? It sucks, and I have lots of love and thoughts and prayers to him and his family through this time. And thank you. The whole damn reason for this video. Thank you, George Pérez, for making comic books so much easier to look at. I've told him this at a convention before. For drawing the curves that I learned to enjoy a lot further in life as I got older. And if you know anything, if you've ever met George Pérez, you know that he took that as a hell of a compliment. So everyone, stay healthy and safe out there. Much love.